Welcome everyone, this is Alejandro Feje speaking. I want to give you a kind welcome to this inaugural session of webinars for ICC, and today we are going to explore a very key aspect for coaching. It means an ethical practice in coaching, what it means to have an ethical practice in coaching. This is a very special webinar because it's the first one of this year, and we look forward to have many of those during the year. And also, it's even more special because we have the honor and pleasure to open the year with one of the ICC founders, Joseph O'Connor, who, together with Andrea Rashes, founded ICC in 2001. It's very important to have his word on this matter, what makes coaching ethical practice, and how it can help us on everyday sessions. So I want just to check if you are listening well, if the audio is okay. So if you can raise your hand, just give me a few quick feedback that you are listening okay, and then we move forward to welcome Joseph and start the session as expected. Thanks. Great, many thanks for your hands. So I will welcome Joseph now so we can start with the webinar. Well, Joseph, many thanks for being with us today and welcome to this new session.
Thank you, Alexandro. Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to kick off this new year with such an important topic. So thank you all for attending. I was very happy that about 400 people signed up for this webinar. And, you know, the ethics, it's not the kind of normal sexy subject for coaching. You know, it's not all about tools and presents and how to get yourself lots and lots of clients. But of course, it's absolutely key to coaching and indeed any professional activity. You know, to the ethical practice of coaching is, if that's not there, then, you know, coaching collapses. So it's great that we can do this and clarify a little bit, at least in an hour and a half, what do we mean by that, and maybe get some examples, get a bit of interaction, and hopefully at the end of it we'll be a lot clearer about what does ethics mean in coaching. And we're not talking here about giving you some kind of list of rules about what you should and shouldn't do, or indeed a kind of guidelines. Every coaching, every professional organization has a list of ethical practices, ethical rules, and indeed the ICC does as too. It's very important. It's there on the website to be downloaded. But I'm not going to take those and go through them, but I want to go more into the basis of what generates those, and also, of course, the number of possible difficult situations that you can run into as a coach is far, far greater than any number of rules that could be made up to try and cover every eventuality. So that's just really a little introduction. So I want to talk about the principles behind ethics, but and also talk a little bit about real problems that confront us every day in our coaching practice. So I'd like to make this a little bit interactive. We've got over 100 people here, so it's going to be first come, first serve. But I'd be really interested in some of you just typing in. What is ethics? You know, what is ethics to you? And then Alexandro can read out some of the answers, because it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Ethics. What does that mean? We all know it's important, but how do you think about it? What's the important thing about ethics to you? If you could just type in some key words or key phrases into the box so that Alexandra can read some out. So if you could do that, Alexandra, when a few come up.
Sure, Joseph. We are receiving now some some phrases. So ethics, it's a common definition of basic rules about good and bad behavior in society. It's from Alejandro. Values and principles is the idea of Teresa.
Yep. Yep.
Be consistent with principle and values from Lina. Respect
So
others' opinion. Sorry, Joseph. Yes.
Right. No, just saying consistency, rules, principles, values we've got, respect now of others. Yeah, carry on.
Well, again, respect some of values, expression of my consciousness, sorry. Values, principles of behavior, behave following your principles as well as your organization wants, and respect people. That's ethics for Begonia.
Great. Great. Good. No, this is great. We've got these ideas of consistency and respecting values and following your own values. And this is certainly at the heart of it. So this is what we might say of ethics, you know, the kind of principles involved, and we'll go more into that in a moment. But also I don't want to forget the real kind of issues, ethical issues that come up for us as coaches all the time. Just for example, a few could be that you're coaching a client in the organization, and the client knows that a manager in the organization is engaging in some unethical practices, dubious practices, which the organization would frown on in the bid to get promotion. And these things could bring the company into disrepute. It could kind of fire back on the company and will certainly harm the prospects of other managers. So then what do you do as a coach? You know, how do you coach that manager, and do you take that matter further if you know that somebody else in the organization is doing something that could be dangerous to that organization and doing down your client? Another possibility, again, comes up more often than might be expected, and that is the client is having a lot of problems in the organization. Perhaps the organization have even asked you to coach this client because they are having problems, and the client says to you, look, I don't want to stay in this organization. I want you to help me get another job. So then you have the issue of you're paid by the organization to coach this client, who then, from the client, wants another job out of the organization, so it doesn't benefit the organization. What about this one? Let's suppose that you're coaching a number of clients, managers, executives in an organization, and one of them says to you that another one's going to be fired in 3 months. They're going to leave. And that person who's going to be fired is another one of your clients in the organization. And this client, who you now know is going to be fired, he doesn't know. The coaching with him is discussing the important decisions about moving house and money and the future of his job. So, you know, these are the sorts of interesting issues that can come up, and there are many, many more that as coaches we need to meet from our own grounding, from our own ethical grounding. So we want to think about the principles of ethics and what it means to have an ethical code, and what sort of ethical code could we make up that's going to work for us. And I've got some slides, I've got some material. We can do some interactive examples as we go along. And as we've said, this is crucial to coaching. And if you're working as a coach, you're going to meet some of these. You're going to meet those kinds of problems where you go, oh, what do I do? I don't quite know. There are competing elements here. So, okay. So let's move on then. go to the next slide. I just wanted to bring in profession, because profession, we're working in all organizations that are serious about coaching, are working to make the organization, to make coaching a profession, something you profess, yeah? Something that matters. And what does this mean? Well, how do you define a profession as opposed to just a group of individuals following along and doing something? And I would say that there were kind of 5 things here. One would be that the members have specialized knowledge and skills, and I think that is definitely true of coaching. Members hold themselves to a higher ethical standards than usual in the culture. So here we have the critical ethical point. There are standards that you hold yourself to that are higher, as it were, that are more than the normal ones in the culture because of your membership of that profession. A profession is self-governing. That hasn't really happened with coaching, really. It can happen within certain coaching organizations, such as the ICC, but overall, globally, or even nationally, you don't get coaching as a self-governing profession yet. We'll see what happens. Profession provides important benefits to society. Absolutely, coaching does this. And members of a profession may have extra rights and responsibilities that are socially defined. And with every right goes a responsibility. So as a coach, and I think it's good that you can say, I am a coach, and you do coaching, and the title of a coach describes what you do. And then this makes it very clear. We can work to this as a profession. And if we are going to be a profession, that ethical piece absolutely needs to be there. Okay, so that's how for me, it links into a profession. And when you think about a professional, at least in England, one definition of a professional is someone who's paid, as opposed to an amateur who isn't necessarily paid. But really, a profession, of course, goes much further than that. A professional gets trust, I think, because members of a profession are to higher ethical standards than the rest of the culture, because there is some kind of self-governing, because they have extra rights and responsibilities. Being a professional means that people will trust you. And here's another really important thing about coaching. You need, of course, to have the trust of the client. It doesn't happen straight away. It may take some time to build up, but this aspect of it, the ethical aspect of it, is absolutely important, that the client can trust you in 2 areas. One, which is to be sincere and keep your agreements, and the second is to be capable, because those are the 2 elements of trust that need to be built up for anybody to be trusted. You have to believe that the person is capable of doing what they say they're doing, and the person has to be sincere and congruent and keep their word. And if either of those 2 fails, then you're not going to get trust. You may have a coach who's really congruent and sincere, but isn't very good, so you wouldn't go with them. And you could have a coach who's really, really skillful, but you really can't trust them from one day to the next to turn up. So, moving on then. What is ethics? That's one of our questions. I was looking up, doing a bit of research on what is ethics. And the main definition I came up with in various sorts of dictionaries is something around moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So wherever I looked, I really came up with those kind of 3 things: moral, principles, and behavior. So, okay. Then I looked up morals. And morals are standards of behavior, principles of right or wrong. So ethics are moral principles, and it seems like then moral principles are ethics, and ethics are moral principles. So it's kind of circular, and it doesn't get us very much further if we're going to try to tease out what makes ethics important. Because I don't know about you, but if I think about ethics and if I think about morals, the two different words, they bring up a different feeling, a different idea, a different kind of feeling tone. They're not the same. So it started to make me think, well, okay, what is the difference here? Ethics, morals. So I was thinking about this, and I propose that in terms of behavior, in terms of what influences your behavior, there are three things. And the first are the legal rules. There are laws in the country, and if you break them, you get punished. So there is real sanctions about breaking legal rules. You know, you don't get rewarded for keeping the law. You get punished if you break the law. So there's no reward here, just punishment. And you know, you may break the law either for, it's interesting that you could break the law for a moral reason or an ethical reason. That can happen. But there has been examples certainly in history where people, and we've applauded them later, saying this was a higher moral principle and the legal rules of the society at the time were wrong to us now. But these people who lived at the time still were under the sanction of those legal rules, and some of them were put to death because they broke them. So that's the legal aspect, and we don't steal from other people because legally speaking, if we were caught, we would be punished. Now, that's not the only thing. Thank goodness. That's a pretty kind of low level of motivation. The moral rules, what you should do or what not, that's sanctioned by society. So quite apart from what's legal, the two go together. It's not so, it's rare that legal and moral will go against each other. But the moral is more about social sanctions, about what's right or wrong. If you break moral rules, you're not going to be put in prison, but you're likely to feel guilt or shame or both. Shame is directed towards yourself and about what you feel about yourself, and guilt is about the consequences of your actions. So it's about respecting other people. And there's for example, in England at the moment, tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is legal. In other words, there is a number of ways that you can arrange your tax affairs so that you pay the least amount of tax that you're legally entitled to pay. But this is morally frowned on at the moment in England, so much so that where it's come to light for celebrities, they've got a very, very hard time from the newspapers and from Twitter and Facebook and all those other social sites, which if you want to see about moral rules, just look at those, where tax avoidance is morally wrong, even though it's legally right. So that's the moral side, and you can see that as we go up through here, it's really also, it's a sense of growing up. It's like, as a very young child, don't do that or you'll be punished, right? And children pay attention to that. Then as they get older, don't do that because it's wrong, because it hurts people, because you get the moral rules in there. You don't have to tell children anymore, don't do that or I'll punish you, because they move beyond that stage. Usually, or at least most of the time and most of the things. And then I would say that the third aspect now is when we come into ethical principles. And ethical principles are govern about what you would do or not do, even if no one ever knows. Even if nobody ever found out. You know, nobody found out in Twitter, nobody found out in Facebook, not even your nearest and dearest found out what you'd done. You still wouldn't do it. Because you know that there's another implication to actions. The legal rules and the moral rules are about the implications for other people. They can hurt other people. The ethical principles are about the recognition that every action you do impacts yourself. So that if you do something, it will change you in a certain way. And if you keep doing something, it is liable to change you in a certain direction. So recognizing that principle, even if nobody else knew, you still wouldn't do it. So that, for me, is one of the core aspects of ethics. Now, if you're going to put together an ethical code, a set of ethical rules, as it were, then there's going to be elements of all three, of legal, of moral, as well as this ethical distinction that I'm trying to make here. In any ethical action, ethical code, for a coach, there will be legal constraints. Now, these will vary a little bit from country to country, but I can tell you what they are in the UK, and that is, first of all, you must report child abuse. If a child is in danger, you must report it. They will not respect confidentiality of the client in the case of child abuse or hurting children. And if anything bad were to happen to that child as a result of your silence, then you would be legally liable as well in some way. So there's that one. There's also the terrorism and money laundering. Again, in the UK, if you suspect that there is involvement in terrorism or money laundering, then legally you are bound to report it. Otherwise you could again be held liable legally in some way. The third aspect is the data protection laws. So you need to respect those, you know, what and how you hold data on your clients. And you need to report a person who, in your opinion, is a danger to themselves or others. That's not actually a legal requirement, but if something bad were to happen, then you might be held liable in a court of law, maybe. So those are the four legal aspects, at least in the UK. And as coaches, if you don't know what the legal aspects are in your country, then first step is go find out. Go find out right now.
Sorry, Joseph. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Just to check, is it okay that we are seeing the profession of coaching slide, or we should be seeing another?
No, I'm moving on to the next slide very soon.
Ah, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, it's okay. We should still be on slide 2, profession of coaching. I just wanted to talk about those three elements, those three basic elements of that lead us into ethical principles, and I also wanted to talk about the legal aspects. So, just to recap, if you don't know the legal aspects, find them out, and rather than talk about ethics, which is an abstraction, I'd like to talk about ethical actions, because ethical, in a sense, ethics only exist when you enact them. You know, you can have a set of rules, doesn't matter at all, you can have a set of rules pinned to your wall, but unless you get a challenge to those rules where you need to make a decision based on those rules don't mean anything. So ethics only comes alive when you are in the situation where you do something, where there is some ethical action involved from you. So I want to make it a verb. I want to say something about ethical action, hence the title of this webinar. So when we're talking about ethical decisions, it's very hard to say black and white whether they're right or wrong. They're never clear-cut. It's complex. There can be values coming into conflict. This is the essence then of ethical action. It's not straightforward. And you can't leave it alone either, because if you don't do anything, that is action. Right? If you don't, not doing something is an action in ethical terms and will have consequences. So you can't just leave it either. You have to make a decision. So now if we move on to the next slide, if I can, there we go. So now thinking about ethical action, there's three things here that I'd like to bring out. And the first is balance. Ethical action is about balance, because you may have to make a choice, and in some ways it may be right. From some viewpoints it may be right, may look right. In some viewpoints it may be wrong. You know, do you break client confidentiality? Well, that's wrong, isn't it? Well, yes, except where it isn't. Except where some other principle comes up that brings down the scales in the other direction further than the first principle. So you can get moral principles in conflict. So ethics is about how you balance those moral principles in real situations. And a real situation is going to take in a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different systems. At the very least, it's going to be you, your client, and the organization of which they are part. And that organization may be a business organization if you're doing business coaching, or it may be family of the client if you're not doing business coaching. So balance, always about balance and different perspectives. What perspectives are you going to take? And you can't say this perspective is right and this perspective is wrong, because you need to take them both and you need to see the situation from both perspectives. It's just like your eyes, you know. In order to get a three-dimensional view, you need to use both eyes, looking with both eyes, because either eye only gives, as it were, half the picture, or much less. It adds something wholly new, a depth, to look at something with two eyes as opposed to one eye. So with ethical decisions, lots of perspectives, different perspectives. Moving on. Second principle of moral action is individuality, because it's about you. It's, if we switch the focus from codes, you know, principles outside yourself, codes on the wall, legal aspects, moral codes, in the end it's about you. And if we're going to follow the idea that your action changes you, regardless of what else it does, changes other people and the social consequences, then you need to take that into account. So you will make your ethical judgment and you will take your ethical action based on your standards. And this will, of course, take into account moral and legal aspects. But it's still you. It's down to you. You know, the buck stops with you. So that's the second aspect. Third aspect, context. What makes codes of principles and rules so very attractive is that they have no context. They are just there. You know, you can take them on the wall and they are good guidance. But then when you're actually in a situation and you start to think, well, maybe this one seems to apply here, but this rule then goes against it in this situation, because the situation is always richer than the rules that can be used to try and define it. So ethics is pretty much situational. How do we apply principles in particular situations? So we could sort of think about ethics as how do you, the individual who is going to take ethical action, apply the principles and values that you have in a particular situation where different principles themselves may come into conflict. You're going to have to resolve those for yourself. So, those three elements. Now, it's also true, moving on, that ethical action involves self-development. So what do I mean by that? Very briefly, we know that we grow up from, we start as a baby, we go into a child, we go into an adolescent, we go into an adult, and our thinking becomes richer, our moral standpoint becomes richer, our way that we relate, our whole way of thinking, acting and reacting and emotional life becomes greater and richer. This is, you know, what it means to grow up. And it's very obvious that we grow up physically. We also tend to assume that once you're grown up physically, you know, once you reach your maximum height and age of about 21 or 25 or whatever it is, then that's it. That's the end of it. And then it's just one long straight road from there on and maybe a little bit downhill at the end. But that, of course, we know that that's not true from all the research. We know there's very, very good research now about how we develop all our lives in terms of our own moral, ethical, emotional, and cognitive way of being. And I'm sure if you think to yourself, the way that you're thinking about anything, let's say coaching, is deeper and richer and different to how it was 5-10 years ago. It needs to be. You've developed. So in that sense, ethics do change with what's broadly called moral development. And there are broad stages of moral development, starting with you know, people who say, sociopaths that go, well, I want to do what I want to do, and I want that, and that's the end of it. Moving on to, well, I don't do that because it's morally wrong. There was some good research from a guy called Kohlberg, who put a question to some thousands of people, outlining a situation where he gave it to men actually, all to men, that your wife is very, very ill, and there's a new drug that's just come onto the market that has the possibility of making her better, or maybe healing her completely. It's kind of still experimental, but it's the only chance. And this drug is available, but it's very, very, very expensive. It's stocked by a local doctor, pharmacist, and you've asked him, please could you have it, because you don't have that much money, you can't afford it. You've asked him, please could he reduce the price? He said no. So do you steal it? Are you allowed to steal it? And some people will say, well, not really, because it's wrong to steal. You need to find some other way around. And other people will say, well, of course I'd steal it because it's, you know, my wife and my life, and of course I can. It's important for me, so yeah, sure I would. And other people will say, well, yeah, it's okay to steal it because the price of someone's life and someone's health is far greater and weighs far more in the balance than money, and you know, would be prepared to go to prison if caught. That's the key. That's the kicker in that one. You know, okay, you're going to steal it, but if you're caught, would you go to prison? Would you be prepared to go to prison? So these are the sorts of moral questions that Kohlberg put, and it was very interesting that the answers always moved in one direction. They never moved backwards. Because he did this over a period of years, asking the same people. And the answers always moved in the direction, if they started with, yeah, of course I'd steal it because it's my life and what's important to me, it always moved to the next one, which was, no, it's wrong to steal it. It's morally wrong as well as against the law. And then moving on to the next one, which was it's okay to steal it because the life and health is weighs more in the balance than the principle of stealing and the money involved. It never moved backwards, never went in the opposite direction. So this developmental aspect of ethics is very important, and a good profession, I think, will craft some ethical principles, some ethical guidance for ethical action based on human development at its best. So, okay, we've got about 40 minutes, coming up to half time. Any comments, questions of what I've said so far? Let's just stop for 5 minutes or so for any comments or questions. Quite happy to take comments if you open the microphone, or questions if you want to type them in.
Many thanks, Joseph. In case you want to that we open the microphone, just raise your hand so we open the microphone for you. Otherwise, we have the chat enabled for that. I have one hand. Let's check if it's a real hand or a software trick. Let's try with. Let's try
Is there
with
a person at the end of the hand? Yeah.
Yes. Let's try with Annie. Annie, welcome. Do you hear us? Annie?
No, sorry. I just moved it for lower hand. I don't have it.
Okay.
Great. And we have another hand from Eddie. Let's try with Eddie. Eddie, welcome. Do you hear us? Eddie?
Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Well, good afternoon in England, anyway.
It's good morning here in Guatemala.
In where?
Guatemala?
Oh, Guatemala. Ah, hi.
Well, more than a question, it's a thank you for what you're sharing with us. And I think, especially in Latin America, ethics is one of the things that we are dealing with the most, because there are a number of companies that have offered like a one-day seminar for coaching, and people come out thinking that after that one-day seminar they're a coach.
Yeah.
And so the coaching practice in our countries, it's been it's been very hard because people are losing the faith in what coaching can do for them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are not equipped, to deal with all these situations. What would you recommend for such problems, and how can we deal with it? I mean, we're in Guatemala specifically. We're trying to. We have a Guatemalan Coaching Association, and we're trying to promote what real coaching should be, and letting people know what is coaching, making people aware, companies aware. But it's been very hard to deal with this problem, and showing up to a company and say, hey, we've tried a number of coaches now, and really that technique doesn't work for us.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you know, I and Alexandra, I'm sure, would be very interested in your association. It sounds like you're trying to get some kind of basic competence and confidence in coaches in Guatemala, and I salute you for that, and really like to hear more about it. So, couple of comments, or a couple of things came up for me. One was it's a great shame, because those sorts of things, you know, where a company does a one-day course on coaching and then leads people to think that off they can go and coach. It's not ethical. And if these people go off thinking they're a coach, go into a company, and clearly they're not ready, then coaching itself, the profession, loses credibility by the fact that somebody's described themselves as a coach and hasn't done a good job. They can't do a good job. It's not really their fault, in a sense. They shouldn't be there. And yet coaching will suffer, because the CEO will confide in his friend, another CEO, oh, we had a coach in and it was no good at all. I don't trust coaches. So it will then spread out and taint the whole profession, and that's a great shame. And in the end, that of course will curtail the business of these people who are putting on their one-day coaching courses, because nobody will want coaching anymore. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, it reminded me as you were talking of a driving test. Now, I remember clearly when I took my driving test, I remember learning to drive, you know. I had one driving lesson. Now, I could just about get in the car, you know, turn the wheel and make it move, but to put me out on the roads with other cars without an instructor beside me would have been suicidal for me and awful for anybody else on the road. And that seemed to me like a pretty good metaphor, analogy for what you were saying as well. Then, you know, you learn more and you learn more and you learn more, and there comes a point where you get some kind of basic skill and you think, well, yeah, I think I'm doing good here. You still have your instructor there, and that's great. That would be the equivalent of some kind of supervision or mentoring or coach that you have. And then you have your driving test. And once you've passed your driving test, you are allowed to drive in England, you know, on motorways without anybody with you, and you can take off the L plate and everything else. Now, does this make you a better driver than you were the day before you passed your driving test? Not really. You'd have more confidence, but you're not a better driver. And in that sense, driving is a skill that you can never say, oh, you know, I'm a driver. You know, I've reached the top. There is nothing I can learn about driving. You know, I'm there. I'm a master driver. Because there's always something. You're always going to get better. You're always going to get better by practice. You're always going to get better by driving in different sorts of situations and different sorts of weather. So even when you've passed your driving test, you know, it still behoves you to be careful, take it easy, and not break the laws. So in that sense, you know, there's plenty of coaching. There's plenty of coaching organizations around offering coaching training of various lengths and various complexity. Now, does this make someone a coach? Well, that's an almost impossible question, because how do we define someone who is a coach? There does need to be a certain basic competence in the tools and methods, and a basic sincerity and ethical practice, so that the client can trust you before you should be allowed out without your L plate. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph.
Okay. Good. Do send us an email as well about Guatemala and your association there.
Thanks, Joseph. Do you want to continue, or we address any other question we have?
Take one more if there is one. Otherwise, we'll carry on.
Okay, we have one. It's from Alejandro to that he's asking, what about ethics regarding the coaching process itself? What means to you to be ethical during a coaching process?
Well, there's two aspects to that, and it's absolutely the key question of the seminar. What does it mean? You will be, well, let me put it this way, acting ethically as a coach, I would say, it's about affirming your individual standards in a particular situation, right, that you would be judged by. You would be quite happy to, put it out to the world on Facebook or Twitter, say, look, this was a situation and this is what I did. Right? So you're affirming your individual standards in that particular situation, and you're quite open to be judged on that, and also providing a way to hold yourself accountable to living up to those standards. So you make yourself accountable, and that aspect of ethics is accountability, and that's the kind of mirror image of the accountability that we have for our clients, because one of the most important things about being a coach is to be an accountability partner for your client. You make them accountable, or they give you permission to hold them accountable for things because they are finding it difficult to do so themselves. So they've kind of outsourced the accountability to a coach, which makes it a lot easier for them than to do. So in answer to your question, I would say it's about those things. It's about affirming your individual standards in a particular situation where you would say, okay, this is what I did, and you're quite open to be held accountable for that because you are living up to those standards. That's what it means to me. That would be the kind of definition that I would put to the question on the PowerPoint at the moment. What does it mean to act ethically? It doesn't mean signing up to a pre-existing moral or ethical code. We can all sign up to that, but it's, as I say, it's how you embody these things. I'm very strong on this. Here's something from me about values generally. It's great to have all these wonderful words of values, respect and honesty and freedom and love and all the rest of it, but they really don't mean anything unless they're put into practice in a situation which challenges them, because that's when values come alive. Otherwise they remain abstractions. So an ethical code comes alive in a situation when you actually grapple with that situation and say, what the hell am I going to do here? And you need skills. You need the skills of being able to take different perspectives. That's absolutely crucial. It's like, what does it look like from this point of view? What does it look like from this point of view? What would it look like from the organization's point of view if I did this? What would it look like from the client's point of view? What would it look like from my point of view? What would it look like from this other manager's point of view? What would it look like from their wife's point of view? Whatever the important stakeholders, someone who has something to win and lose in that situation, you need to be able to take their perspectives. Not agree with them, you're not going to agree with them, but you need to take them all into account. I think that's one skill. And I think the other skill is, and this may sound rather strange to describe this as a skill, but it's compassion. It's being able to feel into those situations, being able to know what people are feeling, compassion, to feel with. So it's not just cognitive, non-emotional, being able to say, oh yeah, they think that, oh yeah, they think that, oh yeah, they think that, okay. It's about feeling as well. It's about compassion for the people in the situation, because usually in these sort of situations, people, it's difficult for them, there are conflicts and difficulties. So those would be the two skills. And the other thing is that a question you've really got to answer if you're going to make an ethical decision is the next one, which is, what is the end purpose of coaching? This may seem, again, a kind of rather obvious question, but you think about it, what is the end purpose of coaching with a particular client? What are you trying to do? And who are the beneficiaries? Who does it serve? I'd love to get some quick answers in the chat boxes to that question from some of you before we go on. What is the end purpose of coaching?
The answers are arriving, Joseph. The first one is from Ivan, and he's saying helping people. It's the own purpose of coaching.
Helping people, okay.
Self-superation, self-realization from Sophia, grow from Monica, development, sorry, they are coming too fast now.
Good.
To help the client to learn how to reach some objective, to solve problems, to make them realize what they can do to fix a situation, helping people get the best of them, maximizing our potential, awareness, plans, results, from Guillermo. Hi, Guillermo. To transform lives, help people to get things done again.
Good, good. Lots of different perspectives. That's great. Couple more if they're there.
Yes, we have a lot of them. Well, we have to help the client to become a new observer of his reality. It's another one. Let me check more. To help the talent to be the best they can be. To create your best self. It's another proposal. And we have, in many cases, helping people to achieve their goals, right? This is a repeated answer.
Yeah, great. I wouldn't argue with any of those. Ethics would come in if the goal of your client was something that was dubious. I want to get promoted, and I want to. What would be the best way of creating a kind of grapevine to make sure that my rivals don't get promoted ahead of me? How can I rubbish my rivals with my manager in the most devious possible way without getting caught? That's my goal. So as a coach, I think you'd be thinking twice. We'd all be thinking twice about that goal. Or my goal of, actually, I want to, I very much fancy my neighbour's wife, so I think really like your help in how do I seduce her. So, this is kind of obvious. I know I'm just kind of making it's an obvious point. But this is exactly where ethics is going to come in. So just what I was thinking as all those were coming in, I was thinking that phrase that I think came originally from the systems thinking literature in the 70s and 80s, Peter Senge, which was think globally but act locally. So you could say, what's the end purpose of coaching? You could say, well, it's actually to make a better world. We want a better world for everybody. We want everybody to be happier in all sorts of ways, globally. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's much too big a chunk to try to do anything directly about. So you've got to act locally. You've got to do something local. So, and I was thinking, as people were talking, of a series of overlapping systems. And I was starting with you, of course, you, the coach. What's the purpose of you coaching? Why are you coaching? You're coaching to make you happy, hopefully. You enjoy your work, you're making money, you're supporting your family, you're learning and developing, So first of all, I would say that's the first system. That's you. So one of the purposes of coaching is to develop you. Right? If coaching is such a great thing that we give it to other people, we've got to start with ourselves. So first system. Second system now, coach plus client. We work with clients. Let's say an individual client, and we work with them to help them to be the best they can be in all sorts of different ways, help them achieve their goals if those goals are okay. And the intention and direction of this self-development and client development, I think, has got to be towards that end purpose. You know, is this helping to make a better world? Would this help to make a better world? As things go on through the system, so it'll become a bit easier to see that. But we're just at the client at the moment. Okay, so that's coach plus client. Now, client is part of the team, or you may be coaching a team, or this team may be a family if you're doing life coaching. So there will be people round the client who are important to the client, that are part of the client's goals and values and work and behavior and everything else, because no man is an island, nobody just works on their own, we all impact other people. So the client impacts a large circle of people. So then our job as a coach is to help the client to impact that large circle of people in the best possible way. And that group of people will be part of a larger group. Maybe if we're talking business coaching, we're talking about an organization. And then the organization may be part of a larger organization, and that larger organization is going to contribute to a country. And so we can build up, you know, we can build up to something about the world. And we say in the ICC, our vision, our big vision is coaching the world. Now, you can't coach the world directly. You can only do it through people or teams. But if your view, your vision is clear all the way through that person, that team, that group, that organization, that country to the world, if you're looking in that direction, then it's more likely that the sort of coaching that you do with your client is going to be aligned in that direction. Now, I'm begging the question, of course, of what's a better world, what's a happier world? There are many different answers to this, although we do have some clues, again, in the research around human development. So, yeah, that's it. Was thank you for your answers, because that made me think more on my answer. So perhaps there's lots of purposes of coaching, and how are they aligned? And maybe ethical action is about how much we are able to align those in any one particular coaching situation. So I don't think ethics is a series of prohibitions. It's not a series of thou shalt not. It's not the Ten Commandments. It's a number of guidelines, and there'll be a mixture of guidelines, two different sorts of guidelines. One sort we can call conforming rules, and those would be guidelines within which you'll act. So this is the things like, you know, don't do this. So you act within that rule. And then there are enabling rules, guidelines from which you will act. So conforming rules are guidelines within which you will act. They will restrict you, you know. So, you know, don't break the laws of the country would be a conforming rule. And the enabling rule is guidelines from which you act. Yeah? You could say, do unto others as you would be done by. Could be an enabling rule, or the greatest good for the greatest number. So those are the two types of rules that we're going to find in any ethical code. So moving on. So here's some suggestions. In the end, we're going to come down to some suggestions, of course. So here are my best shot at some ethical guidelines here. And the first one is ethical dilemmas need to be brought into the open. Collusion and cover-up makes it worse. And from my experience as a coach and from what I know about coaching and other coaches, this is 100% true all the time. You try and collude and cover up, not only do you as the coach miss out an opportunity to test yourself, to challenge yourself, but inevitably it comes out in some kind of way, and then it's usually worse because it's gone on longer. You know. So I would say that ethical dilemmas are your number one thing that you address in any coaching session. If you have a choice in a coaching session between, there's a possible ethical dilemma here, or performance issue, or relationship issue, or behavior issue, whatever it might be, ethics every time. And if there is a client who is wanting you to help them achieve some goal which ethically for you does not work, then you don't take them on. If there is an ethical question mark, you just don't take them on. So ethics comes first. It's the first one. Next one, and this is more now an enabling rule. Strive to act with integrity for self, the other person, and the organization. If there's an organization involved, we could say for the wider system. There's always some kind of wider system, whether it's family or business. So integrity, alignment, what I was talking about earlier, alignment for yourself, alignment through the other person, alignment the organization, alignment all the way up to, you know, if we were to kind of do this all the way up through the organization, make a decision like this, would it result in a better, happier world? Interesting question. The Dalai Lama says that if you have a decision to make, then one of the best ways to come out with the decision is to ask, what would make me happier? Truly happier, not just hedonistically happier, you know. Happier looking at the whole system. And of course, you are part of the world, so if the world gets happier and better, you benefit. So that's about systems. It's about looking at systems, bigger systems. Third one, balance your responsibility towards the client with respect for their autonomy. So this is a balancing one. You have a responsibility towards the client, a professional responsibility, to help them in the best way that you can to keep your agreements. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that you go for advice. You know, you're not a consultant, you're not an advisor, you don't tell them what to do. If they don't do what you think they should do, then that's not bad. You respect their autonomy. They are an autonomous person, they're different from you, and you respect that. Now, what you do about that is another matter, whether you're prepared to coach them or not, but you can respect their autonomy. You don't expect them to think like you, follow you, or do what you think. So those would be my first three suggestions for guidelines. Let's moving on. Fourth one, act within the limits of your own competence and help if you find yourself, and get some help if you find yourself outside those limits. So, you know, thinking back to in Guatemala, the question in Guatemala about one-day courses. If somebody comes out and is encouraged to think that they are a coach and to go into an organization or to find an individual client to coach them, they're not acting in the limits of their own competence. And the organization that trained them, if they are doing that, are not encouraging them to act within the limits of their own competence. Yeah? Because if you don't act in the limits of your own competence, you risk a problem. And you shouldn't, people should not act outside the limits of their own competence, like my driving example. From earlier. So if you find yourself outside those limits, get some help, get some support. There's plenty of it. Another coach, a supervisor, just stop the coaching and say, look, I don't feel I'm prepared to go on with this coaching. I'm not the right coach. You don't have to say, I'm not capable of this, but you just say, oh, I'm not the right coach. And I think this is true at every level. If you can be a top coach, you can be a really experienced top coach, specializing in leadership, perhaps, leadership and organizational behavior. And someone can come along to you and say, look, I really need some coaching about my marriage because I think it's not going well. I need something about relationship. You can say, look, it's not my area, really. It's not my area. I don't feel that I'm competent in that area to be the best person for you to talk with. And of course, it can go the other way around as well. A relationship coach. Please help our organization with their leadership problems. Not my job. I know what I'm good at. It's not to say I can't develop other skills, but you don't necessarily learn how to swim by getting thrown in the deep end. Or if you do swim, you don't swim very well. You make a lot of splashing. So that's number 4. Number 5, keep agreements you have made, unless it's appropriate to renegotiate them. And I think this is a really, really important one because this goes to the sincerity and the trustworthiness of you as a coach. Can your client trust you to keep the agreements? And this is a very important skill because in life, in business, there's so much expectations. Oh, I expected them to do this. And now I'm really disappointed that they didn't. And it's their fault. They should have done this. And you say, well, did they say that they'd do that? Well, not exactly, but, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, why wouldn't they? Well, agreements are one thing, expectations are another. So the more clear you make the agreements, the more important that is, and the more you need to model the keeping of agreement, because it's a key life skill. If you make an agreement with a client, keep it, unless, there's something crops up, the emergencies do happen, and you need to renegotiate. And then, I always make, as a coach myself, I always make this very clear. We have a certain agreement, and if there is circumstances that come up that means we have to renegotiate, then we have to renegotiate. But otherwise, I'm there. If I say we're going to have a session at 3 o'clock on a Monday, then I'm there for the session on 3 o'clock on a Monday, regardless of whether I'm feeling like it or not. If I'm really ill and have to go to hospital, then I do whatever I can to tell everybody and tell my client and make sure that there's another possibility. So keeping your agreements, and when I make an agreement goes both ways. So you make an agreement with your client, you're there, your client's there. You make agreements with your clients that they do certain tasks, and this shows commitment, and you can trust commitment. If a client doesn't carry out their agreements, then I would sack them. Clients can sack coaches, using the word sack meaning I don't want to work with you anymore. Coaches can sack clients. I don't want to work with you anymore. You can say to a client, you don't keep your agreements. Look, we agreed to do this, 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 and this. We've talked about it 2 or 3 times. You still don't do this, this, and this, and this. Without your commitment to this coaching process, this is not going to work. Yeah? We're not going to get anywhere. So, that's it. The commitment of the client is absolutely crucial in any success of coaching. So, agreements there. That's a very important pillar of ethics for me. Sixth one, follow the laws of the country. Well, we talked about that. Guidelines, not rules cut in stone, not 10 commandments. Okay, I'm not giving you the 10 commandments. Giving you some suggestions of guidelines. There's 2 get-out clauses there, you see. A suggestion and their guidelines. Okay, moving on to the next page. Be open to challenge and feedback, and to think about that carefully. So without that open system, of you as an open ethical system, as it were, as a learning person, as someone who's open to feedback and challenge, from someone to say, hey, why'd you do that? Yeah? I think blah, 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 blah. So you know why you did it, you can argue the point, and if someone makes a good point, you can say, yeah, that's a good point, let me think about that. The challenge and the feedback will make you better. It'll make you stronger. It'll make you worthy of better decisions, maybe. Not saying that the ones that you make already aren't good. They're the best ones that you can make. You get more refined. You get more sophisticated, as it were, be able to take more perspectives. So that's important. Always be open to challenge, and that's part of accountability. You're accountable to yourself. You're available to take challenge and argument and feedback, and to think about it. And some feedback you may think it's good, and some feedback you may think, no, actually, no, I'm going to ignore that. So that's number 7. Number 8, respect the Hippocratic Oath. You're familiar with the Hippocratic Oath. It's the oath that doctors take, and it's quite a long oath, but the main point of it is this phrase of do no harm. Do no harm. So it's interesting that in medicine you're not talking about healing people, you're not talking about doing good, you're just talking about do no harm. And that's a very good principle to think about in terms of, if I do this action, what's going to happen? And strive to bring the greatest good to the greatest, let me just read this, depth and the greatest span possible. So what does that mean? It means the greatest good, the greatest amount of change for the better, for happiness, for achieving goals, if these are good goals, so that people move on, they change in a good direction. So the greatest amount of that. For the greatest depth, and that's about development. It's about let's see if I can put this. There are maybe as an example, you have the CEO of an organization, and you have a number of managers. Now the CEO of the organization has the greater depth because they are higher, as it were, in the organization. They have moved through the others and they've come out on the top. Now, it's not to say this is good or bad, simply that they have, and that challenge or interference to them is going to have a much greater effect than a challenge or an interference to someone who is below them. You know, you kick out the CEO, there's profound consequences all the way down the organization. If the receptionist leaves, it doesn't make a great deal of difference. You can easily get another receptionist. Nothing wrong with receptionists, you need good ones, but you can see the point. So, you know, there may be something about, well, is there something here about the CEO, or is there something here about a couple of other lower managers? You know, how do you balance out those two? And of course that's also going to take into account the other things, which is the wider implications on the wider system, which would be the business organization. And the greatest span is obvious, it's the greatest number of people. You know? The greatest depth for the greatest span. So, you try to get the most you can for the most important aspects and the greatest number, and sometimes those clash. Yeah, sometimes those clash, and that's the balance. That's the real issue. That's, I think, my slides for today. So we're coming up now, towards 20 past, so we've got 5-10 minutes. Open to you. Any questions, comments, either through the microphone or written in? We've got time for a few here before we finish and I wind up.
Many thanks, Joseph. So I will down all the hands just in case they are from before. And now you can raise your hand again in case you want to make a question. And we have a few questions in the chat box. So I pick one of these ones.
Okay.
Is it ethic to act following the laws of your country even if you know other countries have better and strong laws that affect the community? For example, regarding environmental issues, or should you follow those international laws?
I think with that example of the environmental issues, if I understand it right, if you follow the international rules, you will be acting at a higher level than some national rules. So, and you're not going to get punished by the country for acting at a higher level, usually. So I would say in that example, and remember, you know, these sort of questions are going to be ethical questions, and you're going to get my answer, which is my answer, and your answer could be different depending on the balance of other factors that would come in and the particular situation and everything else. But if I was running a factory, and I could without harming my workforce or my customers, bring it to a higher environmental level than the laws of the country required, then yeah, I would do so. Now, the ethical issue then would come in about, well, supposing you can't without firing a lot of people or something like that, then then that's more tricky. And that would be there where you'd have to be actually in the situation in order to answer it. So that's all I can say about that one.
Thanks, Joseph.
What else we got?
We have one from Alvaro. He's asking, as the society is in constant evolution, also the ethical subjects are changing through the time. So this is a dynamic process. This is a dynamic process, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If that's a closed question, I completely agree with you. The ethics is evolving because society is evolving. And like I was talking about Kohlberg's moral development, it evolves in one direction. We as people evolve in one direction. Society seems to evolve in one direction. Those of you that are familiar with spiral dynamics, for example, which is about the values, the kind of center of values of a community, a community or a country or a person. It progresses in a certain direction. You know, it goes from orange to green. It doesn't go from orange to red over the years. It always goes in the same direction. That's one of the ways that you can tell that you're actually evolving and developing in the right direction, quote. Just like we do physically. You know, you don't start as an adult and then age backwards till you're a toddler, not unless you're Benjamin Button, for those of you that have seen the film, or Rachel Weintraub for those of you that have read Hyperion, the book Hyperion by Dan Simmons. So we just don't go backwards. That's not the way it works. It seems to be something built into us that we move forward. So yes, it's constant progress. It's constant evolution, generally moving forward. Just the caveat here is beware of thinking, well, I'm at a higher moral, ethical level than the rest of the society, therefore I can act how I want. That's a tricky one, you know. Before you start doing anything based on that, I would take lots of challenge and feedback from people on our guideline number 7. You know, otherwise you get in situations where particularly it seems like spiritual teachers take over control of their followers, sometimes with very bad results. So thank you for that. I agree.
Thanks, Joseph. Let me check if Delton is able to speak. He was requesting the microphone. Delton, welcome. Do you hear us? Delton? No, seems that he's not there.
Maybe not. Okay.
No. Well, that was the last question I have so far.
Good. Okay.
And well, just before we go, I want to ask everyone if, when closing the webinar, you can answer the short survey we are opening to get your feedback and make this space even better. So if you can spend a few minutes just answering a short form, that will be really helpful for us. And this is all the administrative announcement I have.
Good. Okay. Well, we're pretty much on time. So if there's nothing else, we got over 100 people. So I don't think I could open an ethical debate for over 100 people in 5 minutes. So just like to thank you all for your attention. I'm really happy that so many people are interested in this subject. I hope that what I've said has given you some food for thought, and I wish you every success in your coaching. So thank you very much.
And many thanks, Joseph, for being with us today and spending this hour with everyone. So looking forward for further webinars on this and other topics together. Thanks a lot for opening the year.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye to everyone.